Okay, we already completed the CLO1 basically lecture from lecture number 1 until lecture number 9. And after we completed CLO1, then by right you should be ready for your first basically test that only assess CLO1. Okay, the test will be held next week. We are going to have a class next week covering maybe one topic, whatever, and then the remaining time we will basically do the online test. Okay, so today we are going to go through the next topic, which basically in the CLO2 is all about planning and scheduling. So planning and scheduling will take a few weeks after, even we are going to continue after our semester break, and then perhaps we will cover some of the topic in CLO3 before we go into hands-on session on Microsoft project. Okay. All right. So now let's go into the first slide. Okay, this slide is the slide that I always show you a few times already. Okay. So by right, you should basically remember this slide. This would be basically everything that we are going to learn in this class is basically can be summarized in this slide. Okay, first thing first. Again, the middle of the what we call, let me get this thing. Okay, the middle of this thing, this is the middle one is basically, we call it project requirement, or if you notice that time, cost, and quality, it basically reflect what we call triple constraint or the project objective. Okay, the project objective, or we simply say project requirement. We can, instead of choosing time, cost, and quality, the PMI, Project Management Institute, basically refer to this thing, or I normally like to come out with a scope, and then I put time, and then I put cost, and then quality is here, safety and health, and then environment, to replace just simply time, cost, and quality, because everything will be here. And then we need resources. Okay, we need resources. We need to say 5 M's. And then we need the management process. There could be many management process, namely is basically planning. We already talked about organizing. Remember, last week, we do have one slide for organizing. We already mentioned about the organizational structure. There are 3 organizational structure, and etc. etc. We also did mention a little bit on what is basically leading, staffing, and then we are going to have one topic at the end of the semester about monitoring and control. But our main theme is basically planning. Okay, planning is there. So, project management knowledge area. If, for instance, you refer to what we call project, what we call a professional body. In this world, whatever discipline that we are in, either we could be called engineer, architect, QS, surveyor, land surveyor, and you just name it, any professional or even doctor, they do have what we call professional body. This professional body basically govern the this kind of profession in terms of the ethic, in terms of the guideline, how to basically deliver a good practice, etc., etc. And the most important thing is how to basically bring this knowledge to everybody. Okay, they basically develop the knowledge, they come out with something that we call it BOK. So we can refer to, first is PMI. PMI was based in US, but PMI basically do have many branches all over the world, and PMI basically do develop a project management body of knowledge that we can refer to. In the UK, we do have another organization with regard to project management professional as well. So you can refer to any professional body, but at least if you refer to PMI, you can basically Google PMBOK, body of knowledge, that mention in order to manage a project, you need this kind of knowledge. They divide into 10 knowledge area. First is basically integration, and then goes into scope, etc., etc. And the one that we are focusing now is about time management. Previously, they do call time management. Now they call it schedule management. There is a reason for that, because time management is a very big thing, whereas the things that you schedule, the things that you do in terms of time management, most of the time with regard to schedule, because it is schedule that you can attach a certain basically when or timing. Okay. All right then. So if you look at the time management, or the planning basically appear in many of the what we call knowledge area, in all, not only many, in all of the 10 knowledge area. Inside the planning also, you see, this is the what we call planning, what we call knowledge area, we call it schedule. Even inside the schedule, the planning itself is the scheduling. And not to mention, in all aspects, in terms of the quality is there. So that is basically reflect how critical is this so-called what we call planning and scheduling. Okay, how critical is this planning and scheduling? All right. So next would be this is an example of planning. In everything, project communication. Project communication. There is a plan. Scope planning also there. Cost also planning is there. Resource also planning is there. Risk, certain aspect of risk involve planning first. Project procurement also involve planning. ICT also involve planning. Project time management is the one that we are going to focus for sure. The planning is there, okay? And then quality also planning, and then project integration is also planning. So in all aspects, so no wonder why we call planning as the heart of project management, okay? As the heart of project management. So in project management, okay, based on this diagram, so this is what we call project management process. It's a big what we call, it's many processes. But if we want to group into a more simple one, we can call it initiating. In some of the books, in general management book, they will call initiating, planning, executing, monitoring and control, and then closing. For project management, so they basically group into this one in order for us to understand. But you can basically refer to another simpler method. We call it PDCA. Maybe you have heard this thing when you learn about ISO 9001. So they call it PDCA concept. So P is basically the planning. D is basically the monitoring, whereas C is basically the controlling. So D is the do is basically execute, C is basically here, and then the closing or basically the controlling. But if you look at this diagram, you might get confused in terms of it looks like initiating, and then after that planning, after that executing, etc. As if let's assume at the construction project, we start with initiating, and then we do planning, and then after planning completed, we execute. Okay, that would be fine. But after executing completed, then we only do monitoring. No, this could be confusing. We are not going to finish the executing process, the whole process, then we are going for monitoring and control. No, they are happening at the same time. So planning, and then we execute. So that is fine. So that is the sequence. But when we execute, even though it is not completely finished, while you are executing, that should be a proper word, then you are going to do your monitoring. Okay? Why? Because monitoring is the checking process. You do not want the work to be to be to be completed. Then only you check. At the end of the day, it's too late to react. Okay, so you need to monitor, and then basically only then you control. Okay, you control the what we call the works, and then you replan. If, for instance, you notice that the things that it is not running according to your plan, you can basically revise the plan, and then you revise the plan, and then you implement again, and then basically you monitor again, and you can basically revise again and again. That is basically what we call continuous improvement. Okay, so that is the concept. So planning and scheduling. What is planning and scheduling? Planning and scheduling basically provide a project plan schedule that is essential in project time management. So project time management is a big scope. And what could be the scope inside the project time management? It basically consists of planning. Okay, sorry. What is this thing? Let me get back to my slide. Okay. So first is basically planning, and then scheduling. That's why we do have the word planning and scheduling. It is like monitoring and controlling. So without monitoring, there is no controlling. Without controlling, there is no monitoring. Similarly, planning and scheduling is always being used together as part of the terminology, and both of them are related for sure, but there is differences between planning and scheduling. So we are going to look at those things at the end of the slide. And then the last part is basically tracking and controlling. What is tracking? Okay, tracking again is similar to monitoring. In project scheduling, instead of using monitoring, they call it tracking. That is a common terminology. That's why in computer software, for instance, Microsoft or even Primavera, they call it tracking. So then don't get confused when the tracking word is there. It basically monitoring. Planning scheduling is needed for what? Why do we need? Okay. Well, it is the basis of tracking and controlling. You cannot monitor and you cannot track and basically control the project without a proper planning scheduling, because you cannot basically generate, for instance, the Gantt chart. That is an example of the tool that we are going to learn, Gantt chart, and even a few scheduling techniques. So without developing those things first, then how are you going to trace? How are you going to control the project? What is the basis? So the planning basically provide the basis for tracking and control. So if, for instance, in any construction project or whatever project, they do not develop any planning scheduling when basically project start, then you know that something is not going to be right. So that's why when when a contractor basically being awarded a tender, within a few weeks, for instance, the client will ask them to submit what we call their work program, okay? Their work scheduling. So that basically as a basis for later on tracking and controlling basic exercise. Claim analysis and quantification and defense. Okay. in construction works, okay, in construction world, anywhere you go, the practice is that we should execute the work first, then only you can submit claim. You can submit claim, and then you have to attach all kind of evidence. Those kind of evidence is needed in order to prove that you have basically completed certain amount of work in order for the client to pay you. That is the kind of practice. Okay, you have to prove the evidence, even though at the construction site, the client representative are there, the consultant are there, they can see with their own eyes, but that is the practice. Everything must be put on paper. And how are you going to prove those things? So planning and scheduling can be used to basically show example of the what we call in terms of graphic, the plan versus actual. That could be in terms of Gantt chart, and then subsequently we can come up with what we call progress curve, S curve, and then S curve for financial progress, S curve for physical progress, and then we even can come out with the network diagram in order to show what we have done so far, and etc. etc. Those kind of things is basically mean by second point. And then number 3, effective utilization of resources, meaning to say we want to show certain activity are being connected with a certain amount of material, machine, and especially labor. You can show in terms like this. This is the example. This is a simple bar chart. Okay, simple bar chart. When you develop a network and what we call a work program, you can show in terms of bar chart, that which is basically simple to see. But then there could be many techniques that it depends on the purpose. Okay, not only bar chart that you can present, you can basically come out with what we call a network diagram. Later on, we are going to go into that things. Okay, let's say activity GEHIJK, and then duration. Good duration of G, for instance, 1 week. So the bar chart here indicate 1 week of activity. And then 5 indicate how many people that we attach for the period of 1 week, 5%, for instance. So the resources we are going to learn later on, after we completed all the necessary concept about planning scheduling, then only we can basically you will understand this thing. Okay, let's say for HI, so these are the bar chart, and then subsequently the number of workers are there. What you can do, if we, for instance, we attach all the resources here, then we can basically draw the resource histogram, resource versus project duration. This is what we call resource graph. Okay, resource graph. So this is 5, this is 8, this is 9, this is 7, this is 3 and 3. You see the number of resources. Then later on, when we learn in resource management, we are going to be introduced to the concept of resource smoothing and resource labeling. Okay, resource labeling concept using this kind of graph. So it looks like this graph looks very nice. So meaning to say it basically already utilized the concept of resource smoothing. But most of the time when you first come out with the resource graph, it might not look like this. When it doesn't look like that, then it basically create many problems in terms of labor utilization. So a good planning not only Okay, not only you basically can put everything within the project or contract duration, that would be one thing. And the most important thing is how basically you arrange the resources that you are going to use in terms of man, machine, and material. At the end of the day, you are trying to optimize the utilization of resources so that the cost can be minimized. When you can minimize the cost, meaning to say you can maximize the profit, as simple as that. Okay, then second thing, once we attach the activity, then we can basically calculate the cost for each activity. We can do this during the estimating process. Okay, we already know that, let's say A require 1,600, etc., etc. At the end of the day, we are going to get the overall cost for selected activity. And based on this cost, you can come up with what we call cumulative cost, meaning to say 1,600, and then second one is 3,600 for the second what we call etc., etc. Okay, but we need to come up with the Gantt chart first, then only you can calculate the cumulative based on this graph, for instance. Okay, if you already know that these are the list of activity Gantt chart, and if you can attach either, so this concept basically attached using this duration, and this duration based on the portion of duration, you basically will know this value, this value, this value, this value, this value, and this value in order for you to draw the graph. This is what we call physical S-curve based on duration. Another S-curve, okay? Another S-curve is based on the cost. You already have the cost, okay? But then basically you need to do the calculation in terms of cost instead of the what we call duration. Later on, we will learn this thing in our project cash flow forecasting later on, not now. But I'm just showing you the why basically we need to come up with a planning scheduling, because we need to apply to resources. Okay, so the resources we basically attach in terms of manpower. That will be one thing, and then from the duration of the activity, we can come up with what we call plan, and then we also can come up with what we call the S-curve. That we are going to call it financial S-curve. But the most important thing, one, we have the S-curve, regardless of whether the name could be physical or financial. The most important thing is that the red color is basically what we call plan, and the blue one is basically the actual. This is the actual one. Okay, we can basically plot those things once the project is already in progress, for the actual progress. But for the initial plan, because the project has not started yet, of course we are going to have the just one graph. But then once we progress, we do the monitoring, then we can plot the graph. So if, for instance, you notice that in week number, this is month number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4. Let's say month number 4, you notice that the project is basically behind schedule. Are you going to do just looking at the graph and do nothing? No, that is not the concept. The concept is that you do the monitoring in order to plot the graph, you get all information, but then you must react. That is what we call control. So you must basically speed up the work, you must bring larger equipment, you must bring more people, you must work overtime, you must work during the holiday to catch up. So it looks like, for instance, in the week number 1 to 3, they already catch up with the original schedule, okay? Then they are able to progress a little bit faster than that. Okay, that should be fine. So in the real situation, the graph could be up and down, doesn't matter. The most important thing, you notice this one, this point. So by hook or by crook, the concept of finishing project within the time, this should be the one that we should follow. Regardless of what happened, throughout the duration of the project, you must do something in order to catch up with the plan that basically you come up with at the initial of the project. So at the end of the day, you basically can complete the project within time, within budget, within the scope. You notice that that is the project requirement. Unless if something happens, for instance, a COVID situation, whereas you simply cannot do anything, you can be entitled for what we call extension of time. So this can be extended a little bit, that should be fine. But when you are given a 2 month of extension of time, but again, you should be completed within that 2 months. That is what is expected from any client, okay? Planning allow us to develop a framework for project execution. Yeah, that is true. Without the planning, then basically we do not know what to do. People expect you, people keep asking you, okay, next tomorrow what we are going to do. Everybody is waiting because in project setup, we do not have only one main contractor. We do have many subcontractors. We do have supplier waiting their time to come to the project to supply things because you know when they can complete their work faster, they can get payment. So that is the way that business basically life cycle is there. Planning, this is the failing to plan is planning to fail. Meaning to say, if you do not do any planning, you are digging your own grave. Just a matter of time, you are going to fail. That's why it indicates how important is planning. Okay, so that's why planning is the heart of project management. Planning define. So planning. Now we define the planning first. Subsequently, we are going to come up with what we call scheduling. Then you can see the differences between planning and what we call scheduling. Remember, in our initial slide, I always mention you planning in terms of generic terminology, 5W plus 1H. So planning is basically thinking process. You come up with all the W's, and then H is basically how. But there is one W that we reserve. One W that we reserve for scheduling. Other than that W, you can attach to planning. What to do, where, who is going to involve, which equipment, whatever also W, okay? So that is basically planning. Planning require ability to visualize. That's what I mentioned to you. Project management is the knowledge, skill, and then what else? A tool and technique. Skill. Skill is something that you cannot get from the books. Or even you go to university learning, let's say after bachelor degree, and then you continue with master degree and then PhD and whatnot. You get 4 plat, so people don't care. So the most important thing is the skill, okay? Your creativity that distinguish you from others, etc., etc. Ability to visualize this discrete work element. You know what? As a contractor, you are given only drawing. Long time ago, we do not have the computer software. Nowadays, we can have computer software with the Revit, with BRM, etc., etc. And the next future, and we are going to see the modeling of all kind of building that you are supposed to construct in 3D, 4D, 5D, whatever Ds, because there could be many layers. You can see those things clearly, but again, computer can help in certain manners, but you, from your experience, basically, you already know when people ask you to construct tall building, you already know that what could be the step. This has something to do with what we call ability to visualize step-by-step approach, and it also has something to do with the construction method that you choose. Let's say within between the IBS and the conventional method, there could be different approach, and you know what? At the end of the day, it will determine the what we call project duration. If you use a certain technique, if you use certain tools, certain construction method which could be faster, but sometimes also could be very expensive, then it will influence the the duration of certain activity, establishing interdependent. Again, this is what we call relationship between one activity and another. Let's say if you're doing site preparation work, maybe you start with what we call site clearing. Site clearing and then remove topsoil. That is interconnected. You cannot remove topsoil without the site clearing first. Okay, normally that could be the sequence. And then what else? After you remove topsoil, what could be the next activity? That could be cut and fill. And then what else? That is what we call interdependent, or the logic relationship between two activities. Okay, this is what we call the planning life cycle. Okay, you notice there is one saying here. One saying here. This is the saying. Let me see here. The saying here. Okay, why is it not? Okay, plan is nothing. Planning is everything. What does this thing mean? Plan is nothing. Planning is everything. By Eisenhower, one of US president. Plan are nothing. Planning is everything. Okay, first thing first, you develop plan. Okay, everybody can develop plan. Once you have all the right information, you basically use some computer software, you can come up with the planning. Okay, fine. So if you just simply do this, actually it is not much. This is what the saying is basically referred to. The most important thing is basically when you implement what you plan on paper previously, then only you are going to see all kind of difficulties. Okay, when you plan, then you are going to see problem exists. But what shall you do? Are you going to abandon the plan? Well, you have no choice because you already signed the agreement between the client. Regardless of what happened, you need to complete the project within 2 years. Otherwise, there could be repercussion. Okay, so what you can do is basically don't worry. Plan is always the nature of plan is that there is no such thing as perfect plan. You just basically check, detect the deviation or variation, and then basically you determine what could be the impact. Is it big thing, a small thing, or minor things, so that you don't have to waste your energy. If it is small things, or we don't have to react. If it is big thing, then we need to make correction and then revise the plan and implement again until you complete the works. So the difficulties is during the implementation, not during the coming out with the plan. Coming out of the plan is it is not that easy also, but then in terms of level of difficulties, okay, that is what the concept of planning. It is like, for instance, let's say during the mid semester you plan to go to certain place which you have never been before. Well, you can plan right now. Okay, I want to go from point A to point B. You also look at the map. How far is it? Okay, from the map, it looks very simple. Oh, it is just a straight road there. But you never know. When the day arrives, then you start driving, and then you will encounter all kind of difficulties on the road. But what to do? You cannot go back. You cannot make a U-turn because you need to reach your destination anyway. So basically, you need to manage your driving. You need to do some kind of adjustment. If you do that bit by bit, for sure, at the end of the day, you will arrive at your destination and complete your mission or what you wish for. That is what we call planning. Key element in planning. First thing first, generate WBS. Why basically we need to generate WBS? WBS then work breakdown structure, because we need to come up with what we call activity listing. Without the activity listing, then how are we going to show our schedule looks like? Remember, I already show you the Gantt chart, a previous example. This is example of activity listing. How do we get this kind of name? Well, we need to basically to do an exercise, we call it WBS. That should be the first thing first. And then estimate activity duration. And then subsequently, we are going to get the cost of each activity. Okay? And remember, if we can estimate the activity duration, at the end of the day, when we apply that to scheduling technique, we are going to get the overall project duration. Activity duration is just for each activity. Project duration is different. Similarly, activity cost is belong to individual activity, but then the overall project cost will comprise of all the costs that belong to those activity, and then we are going to get the overall project cost. And then determine job logic. This is what we call relationship between one activity and another. Remember, you already list out the activity, and then later on, if you look at this Gantt chart, you notice the connection between this activity. They could be connection, but inside this drawing, we do not show that connection. But once you show that in terms of what we call network diagram, or even when you put this thing into computer software, you can see the connection. Okay, and that connection basically, who basically decide those connection? It is the planner or the project manager or engineer who develop planning. And you know what? Planning is the responsibility of engineer. Planning is not the responsibility of QS or architect. No, no, no. It is the engineer's work. So when you start working at any construction project, for instance, as a site engineer, if there is no scheduler or planner around, at the end of the day, you are the one going to be responsible for the planning. If your project manager asks you to do so, okay, it is supposed to be the responsibility of the project manager, but then he can delegate works. Then lastly, draw graphic presentation of the network. So this is the graphic presentation is basically the tools, the technique for the scheduling. Later on, we are going to learn in the next slide. Okay, so again, planning and scheduling. So the differences between planning and scheduling, again, planning, based on this one, planning involves decision making, or as I already mentioned to you, the thinking process. You need to decide. You need to decide on what will be performed, how it will be performed, what else, where, who, what sequence, which equipment to be used. So when you answer those questions, all kind of W, except one W, that is what we call planning. Then how about scheduling? Okay, now scheduling basically refer to the timing or basically when. So meaning to say, the planning is basically the thinking process. Let's say you want to go to Kuala Lumpur during the semester break. So you have been thinking how to go, how are you going to get there, when exactly. But in reality, it's not going to happen unless you already reach the time. So that is what we call when we attach the timing. So the real challenges in terms of planning and scheduling is actually happening in scheduling, because the scheduling is basically when the time arrives. Then only we can see whether whatever thing that we already planned, whether it's going to work or not. Okay, so scheduling have something to do with regard to the when. Okay, the timing. So that's why sometimes in the project scheduling, the question will arise, what are we going to schedule? Well, we are going to schedule the start time and then the finish time of an activity. When we connected all those activities together, at the end of the day, we are going to have the whole project duration. Okay, so remember, planning is basically the overall thinking process in order to generate what to do, where, which, how, etc., etc. And planning is basically when the time arrives. It's basically the when. Step in effective time management. Okay, examine the contract. You need to get the contract document and basically look at what is being mentioned. Sometimes in the contract document, the client already locked in terms of the period 2 years. Okay. But you already know during the tendering process, that period is basically 2 years. If you are not going to be able to complete or to do the project within 2 years because of many issue, well, on the first place, you might not get get into the tender anyway, because you know that you are incapable of doing that because of all kind of difficulties. For instance, let's say you wanted to study in UTM. UTM in terms of full time is basically 4 years. But let's say you have to work at the same time because you do not have the financial assistance, etc., etc. Like many students in many Western world, most of the time they do not have PTPTN, they do not have the scholarship, and if you go to their university, majority of the students are working at the same time. They could be working part-time. So if you are working at the same time and then studying at the same time, I don't think you can complete within 4 years. You basically need to take longer time. Maybe what we call the full-time learning might not be best for you. You basically go for the part-time. For instance, in UTM, we do have a space program, UTM space program, that cater for the working adult. They can work at the same time, and the class normally being conducted during the weekend only. So, but they will take a longer time. It will be double. If you learn, you complete your degree within 4 years, they will learn. They will complete their degree minimum 8 years. Just imagine, okay? To a certain extent, they have to go until 5 or even 6 years. Okay, list major contractual obligation being there because you want to put into your planning scheduling and you do not want to miss anything. Divide major project into major work. This is what we call WBS. Building technology implied in sequence because the construction method will influence the activity duration. Find productivity, which basically related to duration and cost. Later on, we are going to introduce the concept of productivity. Calculate initial schedule, meaning to say this could be your first draft. But your first draft is not going to be to looks nice. You need to revise until the final version. Then you are ready to submit to the client. And even that, after in the real project, you need again to revise. Don't afraid to revise things because that is the concept of planning. Planning somehow do have the element of forecasting. We do not know exact thing. Never mind, we can adjust. Resource evaluation. Once we attach all kind of resources to our planning scheduling, then basically then we would be able to see, oh, okay, that would be we do have what we call resource conflict. What does resource conflict mean? Meaning to say, we do not have sufficient resources because we plan to have only one crane, for instance. But then in certain cases, we require more than one crane, two crane at certain time frame. So we need to decide how to tackle those issues. That is the example. So project time cost trade-off. This is an example of the topic that we are going to cover in CLO number 3 later on. But we need to complete the CLO2 kind of topic first about planning scheduling. Then only we can go for those things because this thing is basically related to application of planning and scheduling to certain things with regard to how to compress a project, how to forecast the cash flow, how to level the resources, etc., etc. Include all important procurement. Sometimes procurement is basically purchasing of the material that could influence the what we call our project. Some of the projects sometimes being delayed due to procurement issue. We simply cannot get the material, especially during COVID time. Okay, even after COVID, let's say, well, we still have COVID all around the world anyway. So we need to say the production is not going to the full capacity yet. So that's why we can see nowadays all the construction material price has been at the basically peak, skyrocketed. Okay, if you want to do any kind of renovation, don't do it now, because all the construction material now somehow has been increased due to low production, because we do not have many people around to work at the factory, because all the construction workers have been chased out to their own country, but now they need to come back, and then there could be issue with quarantine, etc., etc. Why people fail in planning? First thing, commitment, especially with regard to the top management, with regard to even people who being assigned to do the scheduling, they are not committed. Okay, there could be many reasons. Maybe one of them could be due to money issue. Failure to see and develop and implement sound strategy. Okay, planning is one thing, but then you need to come up with the strategy how to achieve all those things that you plan. Okay, need to be basically, strategy have to be dynamic. You cannot basically come up with a strategy which is very static, whereas thing could be changing, environment could be changing. Lack of meaningful and objective or KPI that you set, failure to see the scope of plan, failure to see planning as rational process, and some of the planning sometimes lack of comprehensive item, you left out some of the things. For instance, that's why normally in Malaysia, if you want to bid for a tender, you are being invited for a site visit on a specific date. So sometimes the requirement basically mention the site visit is mandatory. Why is it mandatory? If you fail to do so, then basically you can say bye-bye to the tendering. Don't basically even send your tender. You are not going to be entertained. Why? If you go for a site visit, then only you can understand, oh, the site condition is like this. Let's say the site, because the issue is that the information being shown on paper does not reflect the whole project surrounded area. And then you go to the site, you notice that, wow, there's a big swamp area adjacent to your workplace. In order to get into your workplace, you need to do a lot of what we call embankment for the access road. And if you fail to do so, and if you fail to incorporate that thing into your planning, and then you fail to put the cost of what we call temporary access road, then you are going to have difficulties, because maybe you already planned for the activities. That should be okay, but then in order to construct a temporary road, it might take a few months. I see that is example of planning could basically not comprehensive enough. Lack of you forget to include a few basic things. Excessive reliant on experience. Well, don't be overconfident of your previous project, because as we mentioned, the characteristic of so-called project, there is no two project basically is similar. That's why the characteristic of the project, we call it unique. And then why people fail in planning, lack of management support in terms of, let's say, management want you to do planning, but then you do not know planning, because you just simply learn in this class a few hours, and during the few hours of lecture, so you might not be around. You just log in into the Webex, and then you go and watch TV, video movie, and we never know also. Okay, that is the issue. Even if you listen also, you might not concentrate. So at the end of the day, not much that you can remember. Let's say you become engineer, and your boss entrusted in you, because in your resume you put everything. You well versed about Microsoft project, Microsoft PowerPoint, Microsoft Excel, Microsoft Word, and all kind of computer thing. Oh, you mentioned your computer skill is 5 rating, but then when it comes to work, you do not know how to do. Well, that is what people do in the resume, isn't it? Okay, but then your boss need to commit in terms of sending you for training. Your boss need to commit in terms of purchasing all the necessary software. Then only that could be the right move lah. Otherwise, it is very difficult. Lack of clear delegation. Okay, why? Basically, first thing first, you develop WBS. You already developed WBS because subsequently you are going to develop OBS. OBS is organizational breakdown structure. You come up with a organizational chart. You basically split people into certain department, section, whatever. Why? Because you want to give them work to do. If you do not attach people with certain work, then who is going to be blamed? If the work is not in accordance to whatever spec KPI that you already set, then who is going to be blamed? You need to blame somebody. That is the issue. So, and lastly, lack of adequate control technique. There are many control technique around, not only with regard to the time control, with regard to cost control, safety control, quality control, just name it. All kind of control, you need to learn about the technique. If you choose the wrong technique, then at the end of the day, you are not going to see the issue being resolved. It's just like the COVID situation. We have been, because of the first time we experienced this kind of thing, it looks like every country in the world trying to come up with what we call trial and error kind of thing. So that's why they come up with all kind of things. And when one thing is not going to work, and then they just simply change the name, well, that is a normal thing. But the control technique is available already in the literature, because when we execute a project, the project that we execute, people have executed the project everywhere in the world. You just name it. What kind of project that we execute in Malaysia or in your country, which is so unique that none of the other countries have not executed yet? Simply none, because you just name it. LRT, MRT, airport, dam, what else? High-speed train. Well, other countries have constructed those things. Resistant to change. This is another example. This is what we call controlling. Let's say things are not in accordance to the planning. Meaning to say, you need to make people to speed up because we are running late. So you know what? People are working comfortably, leisurely, and suddenly you want people to speed up the work. So sometimes it's very difficult to change people attitude, culture, etc., because that is the way they do things. Okay. All right then. So that would be the first lecture of today. Okay, let's close this thing. Okay, now we are going to